Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Good afternoon and welcome to you. My name's Andrew Lawton. This is Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media. It is such a pleasure to have you joining me for the podcast this afternoon. This is going to be a fantastic show. The reason I know that is because I believe in my heart that it is exceptional. Much as I believe in my heart that Canada is exceptional. And we're going to be talking about lots in the show ahead. We're going to be discussing later on the ongoing case of Omar Khadr and his what looks to be a forthcoming release to Free Society in Canada. We'll be talking about that in greater detail later. We're also going to be talking later on about a discriminatory job posting that basically says white, able-bodied people need not apply. And this is at a government agency, the Canada Council for the Arts, looking for someone who's not white to be their equity coordinator. Going to be talking about that later on in the program as well, and lots more. But I mentioned the word exceptional earlier and expressed a pride in my country earlier, and that's actually the topic that I wanted to touch on a little bit right now. Because Tristan Hopper in the National Post had a great piece just the other day looking at Canadian politicians making declarations that this country, their country, our country, my country, is the best. And this doesn't mean that people think Canada is a good country, a decent country, but the best. And the catalyst for this was actually comments made by Joe Oliver, Canada's finance minister, who in his budget speech in the House of Commons said Canada was, quote, the greatest country in the world. And the National Post speech I just referenced said that there were actually 18 prior occasions this year in the House of Commons when an MP of any party has declared Canada to be the best or the greatest. And what's interesting about this is that it's a fairly rare phenomenon in Canada for politicians, or anyone for that matter, to think that the country is the best or even to say it. Now, I don't think you should say it if you don't think it, but I'm more concerned about the fact that there seems to be a decreasing number, or at the very least a stalled number that is never increasing, of Canadians who actually believe that about their country, that it is great and that it is the best. And I wanted to spend some time talking about this because this is very important. We look at our country and the fact that as a nation, we have an identity. But I'm not sure many people could tell you what that identity is. I'm not sure many people in Canada, in the general populace, not the smart, enlightened folks like yourself tuning into The Rebel, but I'm not sure many of the general population could tell you what being Canadian means. Could tell you why it is so important. Could tell you the significance of being Canadian. And I think a part of the problem is that as a country, we haven't done enough. As a matter of fact, I don't think we've done anything to instill a sense of pride. And that's why it is apparently newsworthy when a politician, when the finance minister says Canada is the greatest country in the world. And as it so happens, I didn't actually realize this, but apparently one of the leaders in bringing a sense of Canadian exceptionalism to the fold was actually Jean Chrétien, former prime minister, who was leading at a time that separatism was on the agenda. It was a very real threat. So the idea of presenting Canada as being a great country, better than any country that Quebec could ever hope to be, was very important. It was paramount of political importance, but also to reinstill in Canadians a sense of pride and national unity, and yes, nationalism, which is, I think, accomplished, at least in some form, or attempted to be accomplished through exceptionalism. But to talk about this in a Canadian context, I wanted to explore what it means in the U.S., this idea of exceptionalism. And I don't want to get too academic here, so pardon me if that's how it sounds, but American exceptionalism is basically the belief that the United States of America is qualitatively different and better than other countries in the world. Its history goes back to the 1830s. It was actually Alexis de Tocqueville, the writer-philosopher who first described, or is attributed to have first described, the nation as exceptional. American exceptionalism as a term, as a phrase, has not really been used since the 20s. And it's something that is very important when you look at the United States' history throughout the last 90 years. You look at wars in which the United States has been instrumental in a global fighter for freedom. You look at times when the U.S. has been front and center at being a leader on all fronts and leading by example, being a domestic purveyor of freedom, of democracy, of liberty. And we look at a United States today that is very different than that. I think the attitudes of American exceptionalism still prevail. As we look forward to the road to the U.S. election, the 2016 elections and the primaries between now and then, there will be a lot of jingoistic chest thumping by politicians of all stripes, talking about how great the United States is, but I'm not sure that it really is anymore, at least not at a time like the time of Reagan, for example, when it was so important and it was so true, because the United States was exactly as good as it said it was. And when talking about this in a Canadian context, I feel it's so important to look back and recognize, even in the last few years, that there's quite a bit about which Canadians should be proud. Sure, our country has a lot of flaws, but at the end of the day, I think we're miles ahead of, especially conservatism, where America was, where the United States was. We're miles ahead of certainly where they are now. And I was actually drawn when looking into this and reminded of a piece I read almost 2 years ago by Lord Black of Crossover, Conrad Black, who touched on this very question. He wrote the piece called Toward a Theory of Canadian Exceptionalism. And he looks at the background of American exceptionalism, but also his own challenges, dare I say, with the American justice system, and I think makes a very stark and difficult to stomach, but still valid and necessary point. He says, quote, "The evidence of the collapse of American prestige is everywhere. In the failures of its diplomacy, the retrenchment of its military, in its unending mountainous budgetary deficits, and in the anecdotal indications of how absurd and insane daily life is becoming, with frequent random massacres of people and a completely divided political culture reduced to the most sterile and intemperate repetitions of irreconcilable differences." Unquote. He went one step further, though. Later on in the piece, he wrote, "What is gone for good is the unspeakably pompous myth of American exceptionalism, which was tolerable so long as it merely consisted of Americans celebrating the idea that they were a land of meritocratic opportunity, where optimism was justified and self-regenerating, and where people came to flee feudalism, despotism, and ethnic conflict. It became rather less tolerable when it glossed over the evil and hypocrisy of racial problems, exulted in the vulgarity of what was, at least culturally, an excessively pecuniary society, and the vulgarity of an inordinate amount of popular culture. And American exceptionalism was reduced to nauseating claptrap when it asserted that, in its superiority, the United States had absolutely nothing to learn from any other country. All that is exceptional today about the United States, in a positive sense, is its scale. It still operates at a level that the world has not seen before or elsewhere, and is magnificent in its way." Now, I wish Conrad Black had said that in a podcast so I could listen to those words in his voice, but me reading them is all you're stuck with right now. But the point is valid, that if American exceptionalism ever did exist, it certainly does not today. And all you have to do is look to Mark Stein, who joined me on the program 2 weeks ago, and his comments on the matter. The collapse is imminent, if it hasn't happened already. And I honestly believe that Canadians do not give ourselves as a group enough credit, at least not what we deserve. And I wanted to delve into that question of what constitutes a Canadian identity, what constitutes pride in Canada, and how is it justified? And this is the bigger question here. How is it justified? Because I'm not sure that Canadians think it's even acceptable to be proud. I did a little experiment. This is going back a few years now, and admittedly, the results may have changed, but I don't think they would have. I polled a bunch of random people on the street, not, the intelligent, enlightened ones about whom I just told you includes you, but the general population. And I asked a very simple question, two actually. Are you proud to be Canadian? And everyone said yes. And then a less simple one, which is why? And it was quite shocking to me how many people's answer consisted of either A, a mention to hockey, or B, some form of distinction that sets Canada apart from the United States, as though our identity is entirely defined by the fact that we are not someone else. And that's how Canadians see themselves, as America light or not America. Now, when you look at our founding, we obviously have a great deal more of Britain ingrained in us. But at the same time, here's the biggest question here. Why can we not look at ourselves and our own merits and say, yes, I am a Canadian, I believe in Canada, I love this country, and I believe we are the best? Because after all, if it weren't the best, why would we still be here? If it weren't the best, why would we stay in this country? Why is it offensive to the sensibilities of others if we have pride in our country? And an ongoing discussion in the United States has actually been one of whether or not Barack Obama, the president himself, believes in American exceptionalism. And there's a very well-known quote I have in front of me from President Obama several years ago. This was early into his term, and he said, when asked, quote, "I believe in American exceptionalism just as I suspect that the Brits believe in British exceptionalism and the Greeks believe in Greek exceptionalism. I'm enormously proud of my country and its role and history in the world. If you think about the site of this summit and what it means, I don't think America should be embarrassed to see evidence of the sacrifices of our troops, the enormous amount of resources that were put into Europe post-war, and our leadership in crafting an alliance that ultimately led to the unification of Europe. We should take great pride in that." And I don't think his comment was as un-American or anti-American as perhaps many believed it to be, but I think it was still missing the mark. In that exceptionalism is not a belief that your country is good. It's a belief that your country is the best. And actions speak louder than words. They do. Saying it does not mean you believe it. I would much rather a president shy away from saying that they believe America is the best than actually acting different ways. I would believe in my heart that that would be disingenuous and wrong. And I have to reconcile this with my own beliefs about Canada. I believe that Canada is exceptional. I believe that we are the best. But a country is the sum of its parts. Exceptionalism and excellence has to be parsed of what constitutes that, what makes it happen. And then we're faced with one bigger question, which is, does exceptionalism mean that everything is perfect? And the answer to that is absolutely not. Exceptionalism doesn't mean everything is perfect. Exceptionalism means that the country has what it takes to be the best and is willing to make the changes necessary. And this is when I look at a lot of other policies. I look at a lot of other positions that our elected officials have, positions our government itself has at all levels of government. And I look at one of the biggest failings of our country, which I believe is its healthcare system, our healthcare system. But I go another direction with it because I frequently am faced with people saying to me, oh, if you believe that guns are so good, why don't you move to the States? Or, oh, if you don't want socialized healthcare, why don't you go to the States? And I have people all the time that say to me things like, you should leave this country if you don't like X, or you should leave this country if you like Y. And I have to question, what is it about some people, specifically the left, that believes if you do not like something about your country, you should then leave that country rather than fighting for change? I dislike immensely the Canadian system of healthcare. That doesn't mean I want to leave Canada. It means I want to change our system. It means that I want to change to one that better respects individual liberties and freedom and fiscal responsibility, our system and our approach to healthcare. Remember, this country was not founded upon universal healthcare. This country was not founded upon not being American. This country was founded upon a much greater set of values, ones that are less political and more philosophical. And they are very similar to values to those on which the United States was founded, incidentally. Freedom, fairness, liberty, equality, not diversity, not tolerance, not free healthcare, not hockey, not maple syrup, not poutine, although I would fight a war for poutine myself, I must admit. But this country is exceptional. And Conrad Black, in his piece, I think establishes that quite well. He says, quote, "There are limits to what a country of 35 million can do, but it wouldn't kill Canadians to develop their own brand of exceptionalism. Canada is exceptionally racially tolerant, has been exceptionally careful never to engage in an unjust or unsuccessful war. It has been exceptionally successful at joining forces between the private and public sectors, and should do so again in the field of medical care and in ownership of the automobile industry and the aerospace industry, so we can finally recover from the disaster of the Avro Aero cancellation in 1959. More broadly, Canada is exceptional as the only transcontinental, officially bicultural, parliamentary confederation in history. It has also been an exceptionally successful liberal state, and we should build on this to abolish prison for all but a few nonviolent people, to legalize drugs but require treatment for hard drug users, to honor the treaties with the Native peoples fully, to use the tax system to reduce poverty by incentivizing poverty reduction schemes as a way of reducing a wealth surcharge, and to lead the reform of international institutions." Unquote. See, what it is for which Lord Black is advocating are things that would be massive overhauls of some systems. And you know what? I don't necessarily agree with all of them. But I respect that he sees what I think a lot of other people need to see, which is that you can believe in your country and still believe that changes are required and maintain this view of exceptionalism. And with this, we go back to the original context of this discussion here, which was a comment made by Joe Oliver, referring to Canada as the greatest country in the world. And some people say this is just jingoistic, nationalistic chest thumping. But I have a better question. Do you want a politician who doesn't believe that? Do you want a politician, a prime minister, a finance minister, a minister of citizenship and immigration, a backbench MP, a premier of a province who does not believe that Canada is the greatest country in the world? Greatness can be measured in different ways. Greatness is also subjective. That doesn't mean that every country can be great in its own right. I think there needs to be a rationale for that greatness. You need to be defining it by a certain set of criteria. If you think your country is great, but you can't give a reason why, which is, I think, what is probably the case to a lot of Americans, then yes, you need to go back to the drawing board and reevaluate why you think what you do. But I would be very leery of a prime minister that could not proclaim that he or she believed Canada was the greatest place, because if not, why not go somewhere else? It's the same as religions. Okay, it's different, but it has a similarity here that I'm going to explain right now, which is that if you believe in a religion, you believe it is correct and everything else is wrong. That doesn't mean you hate everyone else who believes in a different religion. That doesn't mean you have a contempt or a distrust of people who are members or believers in different religions, but you believe that yours is correct. I am a Christian. I believe in Christian exceptionalism. I believe that Christianity is the only correct faith. And within that, I believe that there are theological absolutes. And I think national identity is something very similar. You can respect the merits of different countries. You can say we could learn from this. You can say we can learn from that. But at the end of the day, I think people need to believe that one is better than the other. And this is where I think what is perhaps our biggest blight as individuals, in Canada anyway, is that we're scared of offending people by saying that we believe we are better. Mediocrity and pacifism have become synonymous with Canadian identity. You know, people have around the world said, you know, Canadians are the ones that say sorry all the time. And instead of just accepting that it's a joke, we've almost taken a level of pride over that, which I think is humiliating. Sorry, not sorry. We got to take a quick break here. More of Lawton Online here on TheRebel.media resumes in just a couple of moments. Stay with me. I'm Andrew Lawton. I'll be right back.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
Welcome back to the program here. You know, I am going to admit something right off the top of the segment here. I am not, contrary to what I'm sure my headshot suggests, is a fashionista or fashionista, but I'm not that. I am not someone who really knows much about style. Most of my shirts I've picked up from, you know, the clearance rack at Winners simply because they were on sale. Every now and then, if I wear something that's really nice, I probably received it as a gift from my girlfriend. So I don't really know much about style. My hair is cut so perfectly because it is short enough that I don't need to brush it, but not so short as that you see my scalp. And every 3 months I go and get this replaced again. So I'm not going to say that I know much about style or hairstyles at all, but I do know that men do not typically pull off pigtails. I can't recall if I've ever actually seen a man wearing a pigtail. If I have, I assure you it probably would have burned into my memory. But this is actually what's at the root of a labor dispute and potentially a human rights dispute in Ottawa, where a male cashier quit his job after claiming that he was harassed and discriminated against by Loblaw Corporation after he, as a cashier, was wearing his hair in the form of pigtails at work. Now, just let that sink in for a moment here. His name was Adam Stone, 22 years old, and he was covered by CBC back in February. When this initially happened, he filed a grievance. He said that there was a pigtail ban. He said his store manager came to him and told him that he could not have his hair worn that way. He claimed that at first he was told it was a food safety issue, and then later was told that it was making some of the more conservative customers feel a bit uncomfortable. And I don't necessarily care. I don't care what the reasoning was. I think when it comes down to it, employers have the ability and the right to enforce a dress code. It's that simple. The dress code could be, hey, you have to wear pink on Tuesdays. The dress code could be, you're fired if you wear pink on any day other than Tuesdays. It doesn't matter. The fact is, there are going to be rules in place at any employer. And sometimes it may be you have to wear a uniform. Other times it may be you have to have piercings that conform to a certain set of rules, or you can't have facial hair, or et cetera, et cetera. It doesn't really matter. That is the employer's right. And you know what? They enter into an agreement with an employee. And guess what? If you don't like it, you can leave. But it wasn't that simple for Adam Stone. Because Adam Stone doesn't just see his hair as being something of style. He sees his hair as being a social statement. This is a quote from an interview he gave with CBC February 12th. He said, quote, "I'm openly gay and queer identified. So I feel it's a representation of my sexuality and my gender presentation. I just find it fun. I don't even think my hair's that wild. I don't think anyone else would be having this issue unless it was a boy in pigtails." Unquote. But that's the whole point. You are a boy in pigtails. And even though I personally don't really care how people have their hair, I've seen women that have traditionally masculine hair. I've seen men that have traditionally feminine hair. The fact is, you have to, as Lady Gaga would say, maybe she never even said this, but you have to just be yourself, love yourself, whether it's a Dove Beauty commercial or a Lady Gaga song, find your inner self and just roar. And now I'm going into Katy Perry, so I'm apologizing for conflating all of my pop culture, inner beauty phenomena together. But the fact is, you can do whatever you want with your hair. When you are in the workplace, you are there to do a job. And you know what? You go to some places, and they have a bit more of a lax look. I work in radio full-time, so I can pretty much wear whatever I want, although I'm not sure if they would allow me to work without pants. I don't think the listeners would mind, because, they can't see it, and coworkers might have a bit of an issue. As a matter of fact, I'm not sure if Ezra Levant cares if I wear pants when I'm doing my podcast either. So as long as I don't take any selfies during this, we should be pretty good. But then we get into this other area, which is what if you're going out of your way to draw attention to yourself, to make a statement with your hair, as it sounds like Adam Stone is trying to do, rather than just doing it because you like it. And this is what he said that I find a bit bizarre. He said about the store manager, quote, "He didn't explicitly say that I look too gay, but it was really the implication that I'm not gender conformative enough." So just to let this sink in for a moment, it doesn't matter what you say or don't say. What matters is what someone else hears. So even though the manager didn't say that, that's how he takes it. That's the basis of his grievance. Now, since February, Adam Stone quit. And he's now working at Whole Foods, presumably as a cashier, and presumably Whole Foods is a little bit more open to having his hair however that he wants to have it. That's fine. I don't care. Whole Foods can make that decision. Adam can make that decision. He did what I think any responsible, reasonable thinking person, so anyone but a liberal, would do here, which is, I don't like the rules at this workplace, therefore I'm going to quit. Well, this week, Loblaws has ruled and said they found no evidence of discrimination in this case. Loblaw Corporation said that they've looked into this. The union itself had looked into this. And they said there's no ban. And they found it a little bit suspect in the letter they wrote to him. And I'm going to read a quote from this. They said, quote, "We have now concluded that there was no evidence of harassment or discrimination in the workplace. Your allegation of a pigtail ban simply was not supported, as evidenced by the fact that you continued to wear your hair in pigtails throughout the remainder of your tenure with us without further incident." So just to summarize, it sounds like someone who wants to get attention, wanted to make an issue, was baiting his employer into saying something to him, and now it ends up that apparently it never happened. Was not an issue. But even if it was, I would side with Loblaws. Not because I think that males should not be allowed to wear their hair in pigtails, but because I don't think that any employee has the right to tell the person who is paying them what rules can or cannot be respected in the workplace. Just imagine for a moment that it was a straight man, not a openly gay, quote, queer identified man, but a straight man who was doing this, showing up to work in pigtails. They don't really have a leg to stand on when they're talking about why they're doing it. All they can say is because I like it. And I'm not sure anyone would be that sympathetic. They'd say, look, do what you want when you're here. Put it in a ponytail, wrap it up in a hairband, put a wig, or I don't care. Do whatever you want, but not in the workplace. But once you throw the fact that this is about someone's gender representation and sexual identity into the mix, it becomes very difficult. Actually, it becomes virtually impossible to fight it. Because now you are the homophobe, now you're the transphobe, and I wanted to actually read one of the comments from the initial story about this by Loblaw's vice president. And this is what I think is so concerning here. The vice president said, quote, "Well, there are certainly underlying food safety and hygiene considerations to be made if the conversation," referring to the conversation between Adam Stone and his manager, "occurred, it falls short of our commitment to fair, respectful, and inclusive treatment of our many LGBT colleagues." Why does anyone need to express their sexual identity or gender presentation in the workplace? Why can't you just show up and do your jobs? Why does anyone need to flex their sexual muscle, if you will? Actually, no, don't be flexing any sexual muscles at the grocery store, but flexing their equality muscles, if you will, their diversity muscles, their tolerance muscles, and trying to make everything into a statement. I mentioned this to someone not long ago. I have a very low set of expectations when I go into a store or any sort of service providers. I go into a store, I give them money, they give me a product or a service, they give me a receipt, maybe they smile in the process, but even that's negotiable, and then I leave. End of story. I don't care about the life, I don't care about the relationships, I don't care about the educational background, I do not care about anything about that employee. As long as they're paid for their job, they're friendly with me, and they give me what I as a consumer am paying for. That sounds a bit heartless, and as an individual person, maybe I'll say, oh, hey, how are you? How's it going? How's the so-and-so? You develop rapport with people, but at the end of the day, I don't care about that person as anything other than the fact that they are an employee at the store from which I am trying to obtain a product or service. And I think that employees should view customers that way as well. I'm not seeing you as a recipient of an agenda that I can advance. I'm not looking at you as someone that I can convert. I'm looking at you as someone who is keeping me employed by coming here and going through my checkout line, by coming here and buying a product or service from this place. And I don't know why it needs to be more complicated than that. The old saying goes, he who pays the piper calls the tune. And if you want to see a restrictive and arguably oppressive dress code policy, look at Disney. Disney is probably the strictest company, at least that I've ever seen, certainly in North America, in terms of dress code. The rules that they have for their employees, male and female, are incredible. Males, I believe, cannot have hair that goes below their ears. Males cannot have a beard. There is a very strict set of guidelines for how a man at Disney's mustache can be. No piercings for men. No dyed hair. Same as for women. I think they're maybe allowed to have highlights, but no colors of the rainbow accents in their hair. Their hair has a length limit as well. They can have it in a bun or a ponytail or straight. I'm pretty sure that's it. And ear piercings. I think women are allowed one each. So this is a company that has an image. They're working with children. They want to make sure that there is uniformity. That's where the word comes from, people. Uniform. Uniformity across the board. Now, I think grocery stores maybe are a little bit different. Grocery stores, maybe the uniforms are just simply a matter of you throw on a vest and you do your job. They don't really care that much about what you're doing within that. But it doesn't matter. It does not matter because they are the ones that get to make that decision. If you want something where the women can have buzz cuts and the men can have pigtails and everyone can have a mohawk if they really wanted, great. Then open up that store. And I bet most customers at Loblaws, at Sobeys, at Metro, whatever the store is, I bet most of them don't care about the cashier's hairstyle as well. But for the few that do, I wouldn't blame any store manager for saying, hey, look, can you maybe just put your pigtails in after work? And it's not just pigtails. I was reading into previous comments made by Adam Stone. Apparently, he also, every now and then, will put a wig on and some funky colors, and he'll have all kinds of styles going on. And when he was interviewed by CBC, it didn't even look like he had brushed his hair. So it was not even like it was like a well-groomed set of pigtails. And then we have even a bigger question, which is on a female, would pigtails even ever be work appropriate? No, they make you look like an 8-year-old girl. And I'm not sure I want an 8-year-old girl ringing my groceries through. Nor someone who is trying to emulate that for whatever reason. And the reason doesn't matter. No one's denying his right to do that on his own time. You can say it's a double standard because women could do that, but men can't. At the end of the day, it doesn't matter. Because customers decide, I'm going to go to this store and I'm going to buy this product or purchase this service. If I don't like the way they treat their employees, if I don't like dress code, I can go somewhere else. Every rule that we have, everything's down to this so-called discrimination or human rights complaint, seems to be forgetting the key element of choice. Choice by the employer, choice by the employee, and choice by the customer. That is the only thing that is needed. That is the trifecta that will determine whether or not a decision made by a company is acceptable. Are the employer, the employee, and the customer all on the same page? Because every one of them has the choice to do things differently. More of Lawton Online coming up in just a couple of moments. Stay with us.
He's unapologetic, unwavering, and unafraid to take on the left's sacred cows. He's Andrew Lawton, and you're listening to Lawton Online on TheRebel.media.
Welcome back. I promised at the beginning of the podcast I'd share with you a discriminatory job posting. You know, we were just talking, interestingly enough, in the last segment about discrimination in the workplace, and that was an example of perceived discrimination, not genuine discrimination. If you want an example of real discrimination, of genuine racism in a job posting, you need not look further than the Canada Council for the Arts. This is the federal government's Arts and Culture Division. Basically, it's an arm's length organization funded and mandated by the government of being the arbiter of who gets grants, which in this industry, in this country, is integral to whether or not a movie or TV show actually gets made, which is how much money the government gives it. And they also are meant to encourage the arts. Encourage Canadians to be artists, including Canadians to consume art by Canadians. And for whatever reason, apparently it is integral to the operation of such an organization to have an equity office. Not just an equity person, but an office tasked with mandating equity. And I don't think they're talking about financial equity. I was actually the recipient of a link to a job posting. It's actually still open. So if you're interested in getting the job, you have until May 5th to submit your application. But unfortunately, a lot of Canadians are not eligible for this position. This was sent to me by a listener, but I wanted to share it with you. The position is the coordinator of the Equity Office for the Canada Council for the Arts. The salary, this is great, $89,500 to $112,300. Here's the role. Under the direct supervision of the Corporate Secretary and Director of Strategic Initiatives, leads and manages the operations, programs, and services of the Equity Office. Advances the guiding principle of equity throughout the Canada Council to positively impact the Canadian arts sector and through it, the general public. Collaborates with all divisions of the Council and consults with a wide spectrum of arts communities and other stakeholders. Monitors equity of access to the Canada Council's grants and services for professional artists, and so on and so forth. And also to work on issues regarding cultural, generational, linguistic, and regional artistic communities of Canada, including deaf people and those with disabilities. And so on and so forth. Now, you have to have an undergraduate degree in education. You have to have 7 years of experience in diverse communities or arts organizations or public funding institutions. So basically, you have to have 7 years of spending other people's money, 5 years of experience in a management role, because yes, management is so important in government positions. And finally, you have to have extensive knowledge of the diverse and marginalized communities across Canada, including their needs and interests. And there's one other requirement I forgot to mention. You must be white. Oh, no, that would be racist. You can't have that. You must not be white. Who can apply? The ad says. This position is designated to visible minorities and persons with disabilities. So that's that. If you're not one of those, I'm afraid you are not getting the job. Now, I understand why they have that, because it's a diversity and equity position. Heaven forbid they give that position to a white person who's not in a wheelchair. As a matter of fact, if you are a brown Aboriginal woman who is in a wheelchair and you're a lesbian, I'm pretty sure that you become the president of the organization overnight. But here's where the hypocrisy just becomes stranger than parody here. Because if you look at the actual ad, it goes through the criteria for the ad. It goes through the requirements of the position, etc. But then it says this at the bottom: We value diversity in our workforce and encourage candidates to self-identify as members of the following designated groups: women, visible minorities, Aboriginal peoples, and persons with disabilities. And then it says, we are committed to providing a workplace that is inclusive and accessible to all. So, wait, just let me wrap my head around this here. Your workplace and hiring practices are so inclusive, you have at the top of the ad a line disqualifying white people from applying. Now, I'm not going to be one of these people that goes and says, well, you know what, being white is a disability. Being white makes life difficult. No. I don't think white people are oppressed. To be honest, I really didn't want this position that much. I don't feel like I have personally been left out of the loop here. But I do feel that it is increasingly acceptable to discriminate against the so-called majorities, the so-called oppressors, that it has become exactly what they're claiming to combat, which is discrimination. There's no such thing as reverse discrimination. It's simply discrimination. Whether a white person is discriminating against a black person or a black person is discriminating against a white person, no one of them is discrimination and the other is reverse. They're both discrimination. And I mentioned earlier on in the program something that I believe in truly, which is that a private company has the right to hire or fire whomever it wants for whatever reason. I wholeheartedly believe in that. But A, we're not talking about a private institution here. We're talking about something that is funded and mandated by the federal government, the Canada Council for the Arts, and clearly a position for which a great deal of money is allotted. $89,000 to $112,300 for the coordinator. And there isn't just one coordinator that runs the equity office. Oh, no. It says in here that there are 3 people working under them, plus consultants, on an as-needed basis. So yes, you get to supervise 3 people, and you also get to hire consultants because sometimes 4 people is not enough to make sure that your equity needs are being met. And I find it to be bizarre. And I don't believe in human rights commissions and human rights tribunals. I think they are a waste of time and a waste of money and create victims where otherwise none existed. But I would love it for one white person to apply for this position and then file a human rights complaint against them just to give them a taste of their own medicine, because that's what they're creating here. It's no different than affirmative action with university admissions in the United States, where you have people who are accepted to universities simply because of the color of their skin, rather than what Martin Luther King actually advocated for, which was the content of their character. What a novel concept. And I would question why an equity office needs to exist anyway. Why can't the organization, if they feel there is somehow a lack of equality, simply change the directives of who they fund? Say, okay, we have to make sure that there is going to be good content. Why not have that as the prevailing principle? Good content, that's what we want. Good employees, that's what we want. That, to me, seems like it would be a far more productive vision for any agency, any company, any organization, any government. And we see McMaster University, as a recent example, is increasing the pay of all of its female employees because they said there was an inequality there. Why were these women signing contracts if they didn't believe they were being paid enough for their work? And look, I get that there may be, on an individual, isolated examples, inequalities that exist. I believe that systemically, you can point to inequalities between people of various groups. But if you still think that is an issue in 2015, the answer to that is not by creating more inequality, which is what positions like this do. I remember a story that I actually broke online and talked about on Sun News Network. I believe it was with Brian Lilly at the time. It was the University of Toronto. When they were hiring on their website, like any other corporate website, it'll give you the opportunity, if you're applying for a job, to check off a box that says you're self-identifying as a woman, you're self-identifying as an Aboriginal, you're self-identifying as this or that. And U of T while hiring for one position, went one step further. You could identify as a sexual minority as well. So you could identify as a member of the lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender, transsexual, intersex, asexual, two-spirited, omnisexual, pansexual, manganese, carbon dioxide. You could be any one of those, and that would also put you in the fast track at the top of the list for preferential employment, because apparently gays are discriminated against in employment applications. Now, I didn't realize this because I would have to wonder, how does an employer know the sexual orientation of the people who are applying? You can see if someone has a disability. You can see if someone's a woman. You can see if someone is a visible minority. But how is sexual orientation somehow playing into the employment process to such a point that they need to actually say front and center that you can declare on our applications that you are one of these people, so that we as an academic institution can show that we are going to hire more people like you? If you get points in the hiring process for being Aboriginal, points for being disabled, points for being a visible minority, points for being gay, I have to wonder if there will be any other straight, white, able-bodied men left in the workforce anymore if you give this another 10 years. And look, I don't care. It's like what I was saying earlier when we were talking about the Loblaws case. I want someone to give me a service. If I'm hiring them, if I'm paying them, or if I'm a customer, I want them to do the job better than anyone else. That is pretty much all I ask of them. If that comes from a disabled lesbian African woman, then great. If it comes from a fat, straight, white man like me, that's great too. But at the end of the day, why are we still at a point where, even though we're supposedly combating discrimination, combating racism, combating homophobia, combating all of the isms and phobia in society, why are we still defining people by nothing more than the identity group that we are applying to them? Why not say, hey, I'm Andrew. Hey, I'm John. Hey, I'm Sarah. Hey, I'm Susan. Why not be an individual? For all of the talk that the left gives about being an individual, they are trying to rob people of that individuality by defining them as a part of a group rather than as an individual. And that is the true discrimination. Discrimination against people being themselves. We've got to take a quick break here. When we come back, more of Lawton Online. We'll be right back.
He's irreverent, intelligent, and indefatigable. You're tuned in to Lawton Online with Andrew Lawton.
Lawton Online here, and one of the big stories that happened actually not long after I recorded last week's episode, which prevented me from tackling it then, was the bail decision about Omar Khadr. Now, this is something that has obviously been covered extensively on The Rebel, and Ezra Levant, the proprietor of The Rebel, literally wrote the book on Omar Khadr. So I'm not going to give you any new information. And the fact is, Omar Khadr is likely to be a free man very shortly as the bail conditions are set for his release. He was granted bail. The question comes down to when and how he ends up being released to the public. It's looking as though he'll be living at the home of his lawyer, Dennis Edney, who I don't believe will be charged with harboring a terrorist, even though that's actually what he's trying to do. And the basis is that, well, Khadr was young. He was just an innocent little boy. He didn't know what he was doing. And then you have some people that are Khadr truthers almost. They believe that it's not even a question of whether or not he knew what he was doing, but believe he didn't do it at all, even though he confessed to it, even though it's been well established. We're not looking at, with Khadr, a case where he's the alleged murderer, the alleged terrorist. He is a convicted terrorist, a convicted murderer, a convicted war criminal. And it is not only shocking to me, but damn right terrifying how many people are apologists for Khadr. And I actually wanted to share with you a brief audio clip. It's about 2.5 minutes long. It's actually not that brief in the grand scheme of things, but it's important, and I want you to listen because this was something that actually happened on my radio show last week when discussing Omar Khadr. It was a conversation that I had about Khadr, and it was rather shocking to me that someone called in with a claim and no ability to back it up. And if you think I'm extracting something because it makes someone look unflattering, no, that's not the case here. As a matter of fact, no one has ever really been able to challenge any of the facts as they pertain to Omar Khadr, which is that even though he was just 15, he still was the one who did it. So this was from an episode of The Andrew Lawton Show on AM 980, named, well, after yours truly. And it took place. And instantly, as it was happening, I knew, I was like, oh my goodness, this is why Canada is doomed in many ways. This is why the release of Khadr is so important, because he has people who are so blind and ignorant to the truth that are supporting him, that are the ones ultimately championing his release. This is a call from that show on April 24th. Justin, go ahead.
Are you a Canadian?
Now, last time I checked, yes.
Well, this boy was a 15-year-old boy, and there's no evidence that he is not guilty. It was friendly fire that killed the medic in the United States of America.
It was actually in Afghanistan that it happened.
Well, it was.
You said it was in the United States of America, and you're challenging my facts?
Yes, I certainly am, because he was not guilty of killing the medic. It was friendly fire that killed him, and it was an American that killed him.
Well, how do you know that?
Don't you read newspapers, man?
Yeah, okay. Tell me the article. What newspaper?
Just Google it, man.
Just Google it. No. Tell me what your evidence is. Tell me what evidence you have.
Many years of it.
Okay, well, give me some then, instead of
Google
platitudes.
It.
Okay, so you're coming in, you're telling me that my facts are wrong. When I ask you to offer, no, listen to me, Justin. When I ask you to offer one single shred of evidence to substantiate the claim that you're making, you say Google it? How lazy are you? How lazy are you that you can't even give me one claim of evidence at what you're saying? Google his confession.
Friendly fire. How much more evidence do you need?
No, that's a claim. That's a claim, Justin. I'm asking you to give me one piece of evidence supporting that claim. Go.
Go to Google, put in friendly fire, Americans killing the medic, not the Canadian boy who is 15 years old that you're telling the world is guilty, and you're having women calling in and saying this man should be executed because of your big, ugly, unbelievable, rude, and ignorant mouth.
Justin, good for you. You're an inspiration learning to dial a phone while wearing a straitjacket. Unbelievable. This is what you're up against. So if we're saying just Google it, if that is all you need to do to prove a point, just Google, did the U.S. government really send an astronaut to the moon? Just Google. Did Madonna really kiss Drake at Coachella? Just Google. Whether or not Kennedy was really shot. If all you can do to justify your half-baked claim, which, by the way, is not even in agreement with what Khadr himself has said, I fear for this country if that's what passes off as actually having a sensible inclusion. My evidence for my claim is substantiated through court proceedings, through trials, through Khadr's own admissions, from videos of testimony. Your claim that it was friendly fire is substantiated by silence and just Google it and calling me fat. Well, you got one thing right at least, Justin. Thanks for showing up and thanks for trying to play the game here. I must admit, I got a little bit riled up, but I have to. I have a very low tolerance level for idiocy, and I think it dwindles with every passing encounter. The reason I share that with you, in addition to the fact that it's funny, is because that is what it is against which we are up. That is what a lot of the masses believe. And they don't know why they believe it. They just know that he's a victim. And, you know, when we look at Omar Khadr, there are some similarities, not in terms of the actual crimes themselves, but similarities in terms of the treatment of the story between Omar Khadr and Trayvon Martin. Now, bear with me here because I realize you probably never heard those two in the same breath, but you're looking at two people when the pictures that are shared of them are typically the young, innocent, cute pictures, not the pictures that are more accurate of the reality of these people. Trayvon Martin, you remember that, adorable picture of him that was put on hoodies. Not really the most recent of pictures. Omar Khadr's photograph was a little bit more accurate in terms of the time it was taken, but just makes him look like this little cutie pie. Yeah, well, even the little cutie pie Omar can lob a grenade at you. And you can say, well, it's just something that happens in war. He was on one side, we were on the other. Our side won, his side lost. But it's more than that, because we're not dealing with a so-called just war following international conventions. We're dealing with a side of the battle, his side, his father's side, where international conventions were ignored and war crimes were committed. And Khadr's desire or facilitation of innocent lives being lost did not start when he picked up the grenade and threw it. It started while he was there making bombs. How many other deaths can be attributed to him in his capacity as a bomb maker? And here's the question that I think needs to be addressed here, which is, what about his family? I don't believe in guilt by association. I believe that his father was a terrible human being, probably more terrible than Omar himself is, although I don't have much sympathy for that terrorist scum. But you look at his sister and his mother. His sister in particular, I see comments from her on Facebook all the time. She's an apologist for terrorism. She believes Osama bin Laden is the great martyr. Supporters of the cause of Al-Qaeda. Now, if these are the leading champions of Khadr, and we have a boy, as the left calls him, but a man, as, common sense calls him, that has not yet expressed any remorse for his actions. Even when he wrote his self-victimizing Ottawa Citizen op-ed a few months ago, I wrote a response to it in the National Post. Not once did he apologize for what he did. Not once did he even come close to taking accountability for it. This is someone who feels like he's the victim here. Forget Sergeant Christopher Speer. Omar Khadr is the victim. And I don't buy that. I refuse to buy that. And it's shameful that, the Toronto Star editorial board is buying it. That the Globe and Mail is buying it. That all of the leftist activists in Canada are buying it as though he is, in some case, a poster child for an unjust state treatment of someone. Instead of being the poster child for terrorism, which is exactly what he is. More of Lawton Online coming up just after the break here. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on TheRebel.media.
Je suis Charlie has probably been one of the most potent phrases, at least in media, this year. And I don't really need to tell anyone where that came from, but I will anyway. That was the line that was born of the attack on Charlie Hebdo's office in Paris. Feels like a very long time ago that it actually happened. But the Charlie Hebdo shooting in January was the one that killed 12 staff, editors, cartoonists, etc. when the offices were stormed. And this was not the first time that Charlie Hebdo was attacked. That's why they had armed police officers on site. And it's interesting because as far as newspapers and magazines critical of Islam goes, I would venture a guess to say that Charlie Hebdo was probably the least likely to cause any lasting damage. No one took it seriously. That was the whole point. It was not a serious publication. It was satire. And you know what? Going back to January when it happened, and since then, I've never said, Je suis Charlie. I mean, I've said it, but I've never claimed it. I've never declared it, because I'm not. Je ne suis pas Charlie, nor are many of the people who were saying that because it was cool to do it. It was trendy to do it. It was a way to stand up for free speech. Well, they did it. But saying those 3 words does nothing to stake your claim as a defender and supporter of free speech. All it does is show that you are a follower. It was, at the same time, overwhelming. The positive response by journalists around the world saying, I am Charlie. Yes, many of them believed it, but how cowardly was it that so many of these journalistic outlets, from the CBC to Canada's newspapers, most of Canada's media, as a matter of fact, refused to show the cartoons? CBC was not the only bad guy here. Most outlets failed. Sun News Network at the time was one of the few who actually said, no, we are not caving to this. I had Radical Imam Anjem Chowdhury on the show a couple days later to talk about it, and he said that anyone who showed them was worthy of the death penalty under Sharia law, a system in which he believes. And I asked him if that included me, and he said, well, I don't know you, but basically, he was saying, yes, I was someone who should probably be sentenced to death as well. And I said at the end of that show, come and get me, and I mean it. Not because I have a death wish, not because I think it's a witty catchphrase, but because anyone who is going to kill over a cartoon is someone who is so insecure in their beliefs that you know it means their beliefs cannot stand up on their own. And the reason I share this with you is because I believe wholeheartedly that Charlie is important. Not because I believe that anything that the newspaper says is important, but because I believe that their right to say it is paramount. And this should not be new to anyone who's tuning into this program, that I believe in free speech. And I was quite miffed, quite irked, when I saw the boycott by 6 authors of the PEN American Center Gala to be held in May. Several of the writers that were going to be attending, including the renowned Canadian author Michael Ondaatje, the renowned British author Francine Prose, and 4 other no-name writers that were just looking to get their names known, apparently, are going to be boycotting the PEN Gala because the organization will be honoring Charlie Hebdo. Now, PEN is like Amnesty International for writers. It's this international global association of writers, of literature industry people, and the preeminent thought there is that all writers should be free to express their views, their values, that writers should not be censored. And to its credit, PEN has stood up for a lot of people who around the world have been persecuted for things they've said and written. And I think given that agenda, it's very fitting that PEN wants to honor Charlie Hebdo. And that's their plan. The organization at its gala next month will be presenting, or at the very least, awarding Charlie Hebdo with its Freedom of Expression Courage Award at the event to be held in Manhattan May 5th. And it's amazing how soon we forget. Pretty much every journalist, every writer back in January was saying, Je suis Charlie. And now you have people boycotting this event because they dare to keep it up for an extra few months. Prose said she was quite upset when she heard about the award. She said she's in favor of freedom of speech without limitation. She just deplored the shootings, but she also said that the award signified admiration and respect, which it does not deserve. I don't think that Hebdo deserves admiration for their content. I think what Hebdo represents does. And I think they should definitely get the award. You know, Francine Prose wrote a piece in The Guardian, an op-ed saying it does not deserve a PEN award. She said, quote, when I learned that PEN had decided to award the Freedom of Expression Courage Award to Charlie Hebdo, I was dismayed. I had agreed to serve as a literary table host, and I wondered what I would do when the crowd around me rose to its feet to applaud an award being given in my name to what I felt was an inappropriate recipient. This is a former president of PEN, Aziz Ondaatje. She writes, I believe in the indivisibility of the right of free speech. regardless of what, however racist, blasphemous, or in any way disagreeable is being said. She said she abhors censorship. She abhors violence as a means of enforcing silence. She believes that Charlie Hebdo has the right to do what it wants, but she does not believe they deserve an award. She said the bestowing of an award suggests a respect and admiration for the work that's been done and for the value of it, and though she admires Hebdo's courage, she doesn't think their work has the importance or necessity that would deserve such an honor. And frankly, I don't think what she's saying is that disagreeable. And as someone who finds the content in Hebdo to be jejune and frankly uninspired, I agree with a lot of what she's saying. But where we differ is in our belief on what courage is. Where we differ is in, apparently, the understanding of what is needed to advance free speech. Salman Rushdie has called the 6 writers who are boycotting Penn pussies. And I think Rushdie, also a former president of Penn, knows better than anyone else how important it is to feel free to challenge any conventional wisdom, but also to challenge radicalism. This is a man who has had to evade death because of his book, The Satanic Verses. And frankly, I think we need more Rushdies and fewer Ondaatjes, fewer Proses. And the reason I think that is because you cannot combat censorship without honoring those who fight it. Even if your fight against censorship is by making a rude image of Muhammad, a rude image of a Jew, a rude image of François Hollande, a rude image of a nun, it doesn't matter. This is how you fight censorship, by embracing your right to do it and by not submitting to the fear of those who want you silenced. As a Christian, I despise what Charlie Hebdo does to people of my faith, which is push it through the same relentless cartooning process that Jews and Muslims are. But I think one of the big takeaways we can extract from this is that of all of the victims of Hebdo's pen, from Jewish people to black people to, well, fellow French people, to political figures, to Muslims, to Christians, Catholics specifically, one group has responded with violence. One group, and that is Islamists. So I find it interesting that that is the one group that apparently is untouchable to the boycotters of Penn. And that's why I respect Salman Rushdie's response so much more, because he is the one of the group that actually has courage. Not Ondaatje, not Prose. Nor any of the other 4, to borrow the term from Rushdie, pussies. Walking out because they don't like that a few Muslims had their feelings hurt over a characterization that ended up being more accurate than many others in the paper. Not that all Muslims are terrorists, but this is a group that is prone to savagery, as the 12 dead bodies at Hebdo's office illustrated so poetically and devastatingly. When we come back, it's time for It Must Be a Liberal here on Lawton Online. Stay tuned. It'll just be a moment.
It's time for It Must Be a Liberal, only on Lawton Online. Scouring every corner of the globe for stories so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved.
Yes, you heard the man. It's time for everyone's favorite. I mean, I'm assuming it's everyone's favorite. It's certainly my favorite weekly segment. It Must Be a Liberal. And we scour for this segment every corner of the globe, from Vanuatu to Vanna White's living room, to Tonga, to Trinidad. And we find the story so outrageous, there must be a liberal involved. In today's story, we don't actually have to venture far. We go to Montana in the United States, where Levi Charles Reardon, 23 years old, is wanted. He's a wanted man. He's wanted for an arrest warrant that has him alleged to have committed forgery, a felony. The bond is set at $2,500. They have a mugshot. He's been arrested before, but they want him bad. He's a suspect, and the police need him. He's believed to have cashed 4 fraudulent checks that he stole, allegedly, when he took someone's wallet and in it their checkbook. There are 2 warrants out for his arrest, according to the Great Falls Tribune. The police have arrested him. Now, the reason he makes our story today is not because he committed fraud with someone else's checkbook and stole their wallet. No, it's because the Great Falls and Cascade County Crime Stoppers does something whenever there's a wanted man or woman. They post about it on their Facebook page. You can see it here on the Great Falls Cascade County Crime Stoppers Facebook page, the mugshot for Levi Charles Reardon. It says how old he is, that he's a white male, 5'11", 160 pounds, blonde hair, blue eyes. And then you look below it. You know, on Facebook when there's a picture and then below it you get to comment on something or like something or share something. Well, the first like was from a man by the name of Levi Charles Reardon. So when it comes to a man who on Facebook draws attention to himself and likes his own mugshot and wanted ad, it's safe to say he must be a liberal. There's really no other option. Want to thank you all for tuning into the program today. I'm Andrew Lawton. This is Lawton Online on TheRebel.media. Look forward to chatting with you next week, my friends. We'll talk soon.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out TheRebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.